Google के लिए, like if someone is preparing, so what tips would you give?
If you're applying for an entry level, which is what at Google we say is an L3 software engineer, it majority depends upon the data structures.
Can you talk a little bit about your current role, what you're doing, what is the domain?
My team has started focusing a lot on AI now, which is Google's focus also.
Tell us the secret for your success, कि कैसे Google में people can grow their career.
I think if you put it in perspective, right, your career is what you're trying to optimize for 25 years, not for 5 years. That's the biggest mistake that people make.
What would be your recommendation for someone who wants to switch to AI? Hello and welcome to another episode of Chapter 1 podcast. तो आज हमारे साथ है अभिजीत, जो कि मेरे बहुत ही अच्छे दोस्त है फ्रॉम लास्ट 15 years. हमने कॉलेज साथ में किया था. अभय इज अ सीनियर सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग मैनेजर एट गूगल और वो गूगल में 10 साल से है. तो ही हैज़ अ वेरी फैसिनेटिंग एंड इंस्पायरिंग स्टोरी जो आज आई थिंक मैं उसके अंदर डाइव डीप करना चाहूँगी. आई थिंक इट विल बी अ वेरी गुड लर्निंग एक्सपीरियंस फॉर एवरीवन. तो वेलकम अभय टू द पॉडकास्ट. थैंक यू फॉर कमिंग. आई थिंक शुरू से स्टार्ट करते हैं अबाउट योर जर्नी, एजुकेशनल बैकग्राउंड, वेयर आर यू फ्रॉम एंड कैसे सोचा कि इंजीनियरिंग करते हैं, सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग करते हैं.
Hello, man. Thank you for having me. I was born in Chandigarh, तो चंडीगढ़ से ही स्कूलिंग की थी. Honestly, I don't think मैंने कभी ये सोचा था कि मैं particularly कंप्यूटर इंजीनियरिंग करूंगा या कुछ एक पर्टिकुलर चीज करूंगा. I think dad थोड़े टेकी थे, तो he was always pushing towards engineering. So I think वही तरह इंजीनियरिंग की वो दे दी. जब रिजल्ट आया तो अप्लाई कर दिया कंप्यूटर्स वाली कोर्स देखते चले.
ये पता था कि डॉक्टर नहीं बन सकता, इसीलिए इंजीनियरिंग की.
ये पता था कि डॉक्टर नहीं बन सकता. इंजीनियरिंग करना लग रहा था कि हाँ कर सकते हैं. मैकेनिकल इंजीनियरिंग, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक, ये सब नहीं सोचा था कंप्यूटर्स. बट देन आईआईटी में नहीं हुआ या बहुत खराब रैंक आया, तो फिर एआई ट्रिपल ई में ठीक आया, तो सो ट्रिपल आईटी ज्वाइन कर लेते हैं. उस टाइम पे आई थिंक काफी नया था ये कॉलेज, पीपल हैडंट हर्ड अबाउट लॉट. तो बट आई वेंट देयर एंड आई सॉ इट एंड इट वाज अ नाइस प्लेस. तो वी वर लाइक कि ठीक है, लेट्स ट्राई इट. एंड do pretty well. I think it was a nice college. Streams थी हमारी वहाँ पे, computers and electronics, तो काफी अच्छा फोकस मिल उस पे.
हाँ, कॉलेज तो ठीक था. थिंक मैं भी उसी कॉलेज से हूँ, तो थिंक हाँ, प्रोस एंड कॉन्स, बट आई थिंक प्लेसमेंट और उसके प्रोफेसर्स के हिसाब से अच्छा कॉलेज है ट्रिपल आईटी. तो ट्रिपल आईटी में फिर उसके बाद लेट्स जंप टू गूगल में कैसे हुआ. कैसे डिड यू अप्लाई फ्रॉम ट्रिपल आईटी या कैंपस प्लेसमेंट या कैसे हुआ?
Yeah, so mine was a campus placement. So Google campus में आती है, and then because there's a lot of people, right? So first they take a written round. तो कुछ multiple choice questions होते हैं, एक आधा coding question होता है, and then they select, I think 8 to 10 people थे, या maybe 20, I don't totally remember. And then we had around 4 to 5 interviews together on that day itself. And पूरा process बहुत जल्दी चलता है because it's an on-campus one. I think तुम्हें अगले result भी पता चल जाता है. So yes, mine was an on-campus placement that fortunately I got in. I had a Indian company ka offer before, so I couldn't apply for Google India. So this is why I got Google US.
Great. Before we go into your journey at Google, ये बहुत ही useful topic है. How do you prepare for Google? क्योंकि Google बहुत लोगों की dream company है, including mine. और मैंने भी तब इंटरव्यू में मेरा कट गया था, लेकिन तो Google के लिए, like you know, if someone is preparing, so what tips would you give? Because you also take a lot of interviews at Google now, and you cracked Google interview. So yeah, can you like share a little bit about that?
थोड़ा अच्छा क्वेश्चन है. I think let's deep dive into this topic a little bit. It depends a lot on the level, right? So that like if you're applying for an entry level, which is what at Google we say is an L3 software engineer or an entry level, what you would be after either a bachelor's or a master's. It majority depends upon the data structures, right? So data structures, 4 out of 3 rounds mostly वही होंगे. Most of the times there would be structure like कि any of these companies would take a phone screen first, which would be a 45-minute one round, and then they're going to ask you like an algorithm data structure question. Then you're supposed to code it also, right? So you need to be efficient in both coding and algorithm. And then you'll have a similar 3-4 rounds, and then there's one special round which is what we call something like googly desk around. I think many companies have introduced this concept now, right? It's just to see whether you are a team player, whether you have an open mindset, whether you can work well with. In terms of preparations, I think अब तो बहुत सारे resources आ गए हैं इसके, but the
हाँ.
basic fundamental remains the same. कि I think there's only, I would say, 100 different kinds of patterns out there, and
हम्म.
basically need to get good at understanding what those patterns are.
हम्म. तो
Like,
कुछ रिसोर्सेज में जैसे लाइक लीड कोड करते हैं लोग बहुत, आई थिंक गीक्स फॉर गीक्स, लाइक व्हाट डू यू रिकमेंड कि कौन सा इज लाइक यूजफुल?
personal opinion है कि you should split it in two parts. Your first part
हम्म.
should be building the core understanding of data structures. तो like
हम्म.
जब या एल्गोरिथम्स दोनों चीजें ले लो, बाइनरी सर्च से बहुत ही
हम्म.
सिंपल एल्गोरिथम है। आई थिंक तुम 100-200 क्वेश्चंस भी कर लो, बट अनलेस यू अंडरस्टैंड द कांसेप्ट ऑफ इट, लाइक इट्स जस्ट अ लिटिल बिट
हम्म.
ऑफ अ बेसिक, राइट? तो डिवाइड इट इन टू पार्ट्स। आई थिंक फर्स्ट अंडरस्टैंड द कोर कांसेप्ट्स, एंड इसके लिए लाइक यूजुअल टू रीड सम बुक्स। आई थिंक एक
हम्म.
स्टैनफोर्ड पे भी कोर्स है उसका, काफी अच्छा डेटा स्ट्रक्चर्स का
हम्म.
चलो।
हाँ.
And then you need to get into practice, right? Because obviously it's a 45-minute interview. If you haven't seen some patterns before, it's hard to crack that pattern, even if your fundamentals are correct, right? So you need to understand some of
हम्म.
those patterns. I think interview bit is a good resource, lead code is a good
हम्म.
resource. Uh, and then
हम्म.
any geeks for geeks, and I'm sure there's many more.
हम्म. हम्म. आई थिंक you said कि entry level पे because it's mainly coding, ये सब resources है, questions कर लो, when you feel comfortable you can apply. जब levels के साथ interview process change आता है, तो senior levels पे how does that change?
तो आई थिंक जैसे जॉब एक्सपेक्टेशंस चेंज होती है, वैसे ही इंटरव्यू प्रोसेस भी चेंज होता है। लाइक एट सीनियर लेवल
हम्म.
यू आर expected to design stuff, and
हम्म.
that starts reflecting in your interviews also. Starting
हम्म.
L5 if you're a senior engineer, you
हम्म.
have design interview questions also, and then
हम्म.
you'll still have, like, the coding interviews, and then I think once you get to 6 and 7 you get more of the design and domain knowledge based questions. So L7 level pe, which is like a senior staff, let's say, a person would be giving like two design, one domain, and then maybe
हम्म.
one algorithm and coding question.
हम्म.
I think to design ka jo, like, the key part here is very hard to cram.
हम्म.
There's not 100 patterns on there. There's actually a lot of
हम्म.
trade-offs between even the low-level things and the high-level things and all. So the work experience that you're doing actually helps a lot in preparing for the design part of it. But
हम्म.
again, there's a lot of good courses that help you broaden your mind. I think my favorite
हम्म.
one is there's a course by Educative. It's called Grokking the System Design Interview. So
Okay.
how would you build something like, let's say, DoorDash or Lyft or
हाँ.
Uber,
हाँ.
like
हम्म.
products that we use every day? I think it's a good
हम्म.
one. Please go through. You also start getting leadership questions, which
हम्म.
are both hypothetical and background based. Jaise ki, okay, suppose you were in a situation where your team was feeling low on morale, how would you handle that, right? Or
हम्म.
were you in a situation where somebody in your team wanted to leave the team, how did you support them? So, like,
Yeah.
things like they're trying to see what kind of an experience you have, and also trying to put you in hypothetical situations.
Because I think at senior level have to probably support a team या फिर कुछ engineers को mentor करना पड़ेगा, तो like what is your experience in the past? Great. Thank you. I think that was very useful क्योंकि I guess बहुत सारे लोग मुझसे भी ये question पूछते हैं और करते हैं कि मतलब कैसे interview के लिए prepare करें. So that, I think that was very useful. Now coming back to your Google journey. So you joined Google like almost 10 years back and as entry level from college placement. 10 साल हो गए. And you've had a very fantastic career run from IC3 to senior software engineer manager. दोस्त की तारीफ करते हुए थोड़ा अजीब लग रहा है, बट आई थिंक तारीफ करनी चाहिए। तो थोड़ा सा अपना जर्नी के बारे में बताना, व्हाट वाज द कूल स्टफ दैट यू वर्कड ऑन, a little bit about the Google culture as well. You were here, so like you walk us through your journey a little bit.
Yeah. So I started in Google Sydney actually, which was very
Hmm.
interesting. I think Google के US issues, visa issues हो रहे थे कुछ, so they gave me an
हाँ.
option between Canada and Australia. So I went with Google Sydney. It was a beautiful place, by
हम्म.
the way. At that
हम्म.
point, I used to work on Google Plus.
हम्म.
जो सब लोगों को होता है ना, imposter syndrome, मुझे भी हुआ था. Team was a superstar team. I think they were really good coders. I think one of them had like 100 patents in their name. There's another person who was getting like $200,000 of grant by the government. There was a great coder in the team. So yeah, मुझे वो imposter syndrome हुआ. I think I spent the first 3 months definitely panicking about it, right? Trying
Yeah.
to, but then you slowly start, like, finding your ground. You slowly start getting comfortable a little bit. It's not rocket science in the end. I mean, you did prepare for it, right? You do have your basics, I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
So I think uske baad then I moved to US, just 1 year in Sydney. I've been in the same org or the domain for last 10.5 years, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
know this is a different path. Some people change teams a lot, but like, I mean, basic se start kare to L3 mein, like, you basically just implementing stuff that others are doing, right? Asking you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you used to
Mm-hmm.
do, right? Get better at coding,
Mm-hmm.
get better building prototypes and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think if you like, I liked my domain, I liked my team a lot, and especially my manager, right? I feel like
Mm-hmm.
a good manager teaches you a lot. I think mentorship
हाँ.
or guide. So I stayed in that team, and some opportunities opened up. Like I remember when I was in L4, the TL of a big project just left Google,
Mm-hmm.
and
हाँ
they
हाँ.
asked if I wanted to step up, and I was like, yeah, I'll try it. And that was a great thing. I think
Mm-hmm.
L5, a similar thing happened. My manager was not able to scale with the number of reports, and he was like, "Hey, can you like lead some? Can you start like pseudo managing some of them?" And again, that was a great
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. I think
Mm-hmm.
slowly, इस domain में opportunities मिलती गई. I was able to build on top of them.
Okay, that's great. I think you touched upon a very important thing, which is importance of manager. कि हमेशा हम लोग आई थिंक जब टीम स्पेशली एज अ फ्रेश ग्रेड चूज कर रहे होते हैं या फिर न्यू व्हेन वी आर न्यू टू दिस कंपनी लाइक चूज कर रहे होते हैं लाइक कि हाँ टेक स्टैक क्या है प्रॉब्लम स्पेस क्या है वो चीजें इंपॉर्टेंट है बट आई थिंक मैनेजर एज यू सेड इज आल्सो वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट क्योंकि they create opportunity for you they guide you through your career so I think that's like I also noticed कि मतलब मेरे career में भी manager played a very big role so I think that's a very good point. Now, coming to your current role, can you talk a little bit about your current role, ki, like what you're doing, what is the domain, and what are you supporting? Because you're a manager.
Yeah, so I have a team size of around 25, and I've had three managers that reported to me. So like our org basically does like personalized recommendations for people. So
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
thing that we're most proud of is the Gmail's autocomplete, which I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
maybe ये सबने use किया है.
सबने
तो
use किया है. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so we do like the recommendations for that, right? And so that's
Mm-hmm.
basically what my team in general does, right? Like they actually does these smart intelligence people features, like how do people share with others, who's somebody they want to talk to at this point, who's somebody they want to plus mention on a doc. Role obviously changed a lot in the last years, right? Like so currently I
Mm-hmm.
manage this team, which it's quite widespread, I would say. Like so our org in general is in this social space, right? Like how do people represent themselves? How do people
Uh-huh.
interact with people? So like contacts app is an example of something where you store contacts for others, right? So that's something
Mm-hmm.
that as an org go in and we make. Sorry. So the overall, like I think I have like three sub teams that I manage. They
Mm-hmm.
work on similar things, but they're still different. So it's you create like a substructure there. And in
Mm-hmm.
my most reorg, let's say, my team has started focusing a lot on AI now, which is Google's focus
Mm-hmm.
also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. Wow. So a lot of questions on that. Firstly, so you have been an IC and a manager at Google. IC और manager role में at Google, like क्या differences है?
Yeah, so very good question. So I think Google is one of the few companies that actually has a third role, which is what we call TLM, which is a tech lead
TLM.
manager.
Mm-hmm.
So you have pure ICs, you have pure managers, and then you have in between, which is a tech lead manager. IC role is a lot about like you want to get yourself productive, like you want to go
Mm-hmm.
deep into a technology. Manager role is a lot about how you build your teams, like how do you scale them,
Mm-hmm.
if people are happy in your team and all. I think,
Mm-hmm.
and then TLM role is somewhat of a mix of that, where you're actually doing both the technical stuff, but by building a team also. So I was TLM for a majority of the time and only converted to an M like very recently. The
Mm-hmm.
reason I chose the manager path, right? Like I think that shows the difference also. As when you scale up in your levels, right? Like once you're at L5 and all, there's something what we call which is called influence on others. Like what is your influence on the other people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
every person is supposed to have an influence on others, right? Like even at IC
Yeah.
will have influence on others and manager. So I remember my director used to say this thing, which is, do you want to be remembered for the infrastructure that you built or for the teams that you created?
Mm-hmm.
That's a way to put it, right? And I was like, I actually want to be remembered for both. And so that's like
Yeah. That's why TLM.
that's why I
Great.
was feeling. But I think sorry, but your question was a little different, right? I think your question was like, what is the actual difference in day-to-day jobs and stuff, right? when you're a people manager, the biggest difference is that your prioritizations have to change, right? You really
Mm-hmm.
need to put people first if you're going to be a good manager, right? So, like, suppose you're in the deep technical space, you're actually meeting, but somebody pings you, right? Like with the urgent thing, you have to drop whatever you're doing and go attend them, right? You have to build that
Mm-hmm.
empathy. You have to actually care about people and their career, think
Mm-hmm.
about them, and not just your infrastructure. And that to me is the biggest difference, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
in some you're actually going to make a huge difference in their
Mm-hmm.
day-to-day lives, in their careers, right? Like having
Mm-hmm.
bad managers.
तो आई थिंक काफी लोगों की ये भी अंडरस्टैंडिंग है कि मैनेजर इफ यू बिकम नॉन टेक्निकल आई थिंक ये टीएलएम वाला जो बात है गूगल में इट्स प्रीटी वेल डिफाइंड सो इफ यू वांट टू स्टे टेक्निकल बट यू आल्सो वांट टू लीड सो टीएलएम इज समथिंग दैट एग्जिस्ट एंड दैट्स समथिंग दैट यू रेकमेंड राइट कि अगर दोनों चीजें करनी है
Yeah, I think so. I think, and again, सबकी अलग interest है, but I actually felt कि like जब तुम starting में the first time you become a manager, right? You feel that imposter syndrome again. A lot of people that they also say that. And if you are actually technically good, it helps you build respect with the team, right? अगर
या
मैं अभी जाके किसी को बोलूँगा, hey, you took 2 weeks to do this. This can be done in a day. If I can't actually show them that this can be done in a day, right? तो वो respect build नहीं होती. तो actually feel
हाँ
always start small with a small team, 5, 6 people, and then actually be a tech lead manager for some time before you transition to a full time thing.
That's very good advice क्योंकि I think ये काफी important है कि as a manager even if you are a little away from the technical details but if you can तुम्हें ये तो assess करना ही पड़ेगा ना कि किसका क्या scope होना चाहिए और उनको तुम क्या advice दे सकते हो तो एक और क्वेश्चन है कि यू टॉक्ड अबाउट द डिफरेंसेस बिटवीन कि मैनेजमेंट रोल एंड आईसी रोल बट मैनेजर क्यों बनना चाहिए एंड किसको बनना चाहिए लाइक इफ समवन इज डिसाइडिंग कि मैं एज एन आईसी ग्रो करूं या फिर आई शुड टेक द मैनेजमेंट हाउ वुड यू गिव देम द फ्रेमवर्क टू थिंक कि दिस इज व्हाई यू शुड बिकम अ मैनेजर या
काफी इंटरेस्टिंग क्वेश्चन है, काफी हार्ड क्वेश्चन है ये। आई टेल यू मैं क्यों बना था, एंड देन maybe I'll try to generalize it, right? So, like when I was a tech lead, you obviously as a tech lead work with a lot of people, right? And उन लोगों के साथ very close, you are somewhat vested in their success also, right? Not somewhat, actually vested in their success. I may say, like in every company, there's this calibration and promotion cycle, right? Which your manager attends, right? Like if you're not the manager. And I feel like we were playing a broken telephone. Like I would give some feedback about them, and then कुछ हो जाता था जिस रूम में मैं नहीं हूँ, and then result कुछ आता था, and like they were not happy about it, and I was also not happy about it, right? Because maybe the person representing didn't have all the information. They were playing a broken telephone. So at that point, like that, like मुझे बहुत काफी pinch हुआ उस चीज से कि you know working on a project जिसपे मैं lead कर रहा हूँ and it's somewhat my responsibility. तो मेरा प्राइमरी ट्रिगर वो था कि आई वांटेड टू स्टॉप दिस ब्रोकन टेलीफोन, एंड दैट्स व्हाई आई स्टार्टेड एक्सपेरिमेंटिंग विद इट। वंस आई डिड इनफ, राइट, आई गॉट अ गुड फीडबैक लूप कि आई थिंक आई वाज हेल्पिंग पीपल, लाइक पीपल एक्चुअली कि लाइक बात करके कुछ अच्छा हो रहा है या कोई स्ट्रक्चर आ पा रहा है, उनका करियर आ रहा है, तो दैट वाज अ गुड फीडबैक लूप। Now that I look at other managers' journey and stuff, right, I feel like सबके reasons काफी different है। एक ये reason की category होगी जो मैंने बोला। एक reason की category है कि it's actually some people's strength and you want to play, right? Some people are just actually very good with work, with, right? And they want to play with this strength, and that's a good thing to do, right? Some people actually genuinely care about like the emotional well-being of people, right? Or like how people are feeling, and they should all definitely become like they have that empathy question. I think people actually, I would say, avoid this track, uh, are that are maybe thinking that this is going to help with their promotion, or because it doesn't, right? Like, it
It
doesn't change.
doesn't.
And your like promotion chances also doesn't change. Like even in the L6 at Google, even if you're a TLM versus M, you still have to show the same amount of technical work, right? Because a team size of 5 doesn't get you a lot of points, right? So it doesn't help. But the negative point of that is too much, right? Like I think as a man, agar like kal ko wo bole ki yaar, I've seen some people like this, right? Like will be like कि मैं बन गया, oh but मेरे से अब काम नहीं हो रहा, and you still expect technical stuff from me, तो मैं हट रहा हूँ. But changing somebody's manager, right? Like every 6 months or 1 year, it's too painful, right? Like तुम्हें खुद से रिकैलिब्रेट होता है, कुछ होता है, and then you lose trust on that person also, that made a
Right,
decision. So I think
right.
you should stay away from this if you genuinely don't think you would put people above technical stuff in a given situation.
या आई थिंक दैट्स अ वेरी गुड वे ऑफ पुटिंग इट। क्योंकि मैंने भी जब मैनेजमेंट उसमें स्विच किया था, तो ये सबसे बड़ा माइंडसेट शिफ्ट होता है कि पुटिंग पीपल फर्स्ट। क्योंकि एज एन आईसी you're always thinking about project, even if you are leading people, and then putting people first, putting their career growth first, I think वो mindset shift होता है, and which is like I think very key if you want to become successful as a manager। इसमें एक और चीज काफी इंपॉर्टेंट है, आई थिंक लोगों को स्पेशली कमिंग फ्रॉम डिफरेंट कंपनीज, उनका माइंडसेट होता है कि अगर मुझे ग्रो करना है तो मैनेजर तो बनना ही पड़ेगा, बिकॉज लीडर्स आर मैनेजर्स। बट आई थिंक स्पेशली इन बिग कंपनीज लाइक गूगल, फेसबुक या फैंग, एज एन आईसी ऑल्सो बहुत ही अच्छा पाथ है। इन सम वेज आई थिंक easier path है देन मैनेजर टू ग्रो, राइट? बट मे बी छोटी कंपनीज में शायद ऑप्शन ना होती है लोगों के पास, एंड दैट्स व्हाई वो मैनेजर बनने की ट्राई करते हैं। बट इन बिग कंपनीज आईसी अगर अच्छे हो एंड दैट्स योर स्ट्रेंथ, तो यू कैन जस्ट ग्रो एज एन आईसी।
आई थिंक तेरा पॉइंट बिल्कुल सही है। आई फील लाइक जो इजीनेस और वो है, वो आई डोंट थिंक पाथ्स में है, वो आई थिंक तुम्हारी स्ट्रेंथ्स में है। लाइक आई
स्ट्रेंथ्स
फील
में।
तो लाइक डायरेक्टर वर्सेस प्रिंसिपल इंजीनियर दोनों ही बहुत हार्ड है इफ यू डोंट हैव द स्किल्स फॉर इट, राइट? लाइक आई
या
थिंक
does do Google let you try to be a manager? Like for example, if I say कि मुझे 3 महीने ट्राई करना है and उसके बाद I'll decide कि whether I like it or not, या ऐसा कुछ नहीं है प्रोग्राम?
तो आई डोंट थिंक कोई ऐसे यार हार्ड एंड फास्ट रिटन रूल है, बट एवरी ऑब्वियसली whenever you making a new manager, there is a process that you have to follow. You get an HR
हम्म
involved, you have to get it approved, you have to make sure this person is the right fit and others will go. I would not give that people like a chance. Like I would not recommend it अगर मेरे like उसमें control में होता, because it's too upsetting for the people जिनके साथ आप experiment
हम्म
कर रहे हो उनके लिए। तो
हाँ।
and also I don't think, I think there are other ways for you to figure this out. Like what I say people is
हम्म
intern host karo. That's a
हाँ हाँ।
very good way of actually knowing whether you can become a manager or not, because you're actually
राइट
responsible for somebody's career and their time and their rating, right? Which is
राइट
what you are as a manager.
राइट राइट, या आई थिंक दैट्स अ वेरी गुड सजेशन कि इंटर्न को अगर तुम्हें सपोर्ट करके, इफ इट्स गिविंग यू प्लेजर एंड अच्छा लग रहा है तुम्हें एंड यू आर एंजॉयिंग दैट, तो दैट गिव यू सम सिग्नल। Okay, that's very useful. Now that you're a manager and you're supporting different teams, a very important part of that, as you said, is growing career. And you've also had a fantastic run at Google. So, like, tell us a secret for your success, and जो बाकियों को भी you coach कि कैसे Google में people can grow their career. We can start with IC and then maybe also talk about manager. कि कोई या तो start कर रहा है या फिर already है and they feel stuck at their level, तो गूगल में कैसे?
I wish कोई secret recipe होती जो मैं भेज सकता। But I think it's a great question, right? And I think calibration बहुत important है इसके लिए. Like what I usually tell
हम्म,
people is कि see, most people become a software engineer, including me, and I think you at around 21, right? So
कुछ पता नहीं
22
होता,
is,
बस बन जाते हैं।
and मतलब you become quite at a young age, right? 22 years की age
Yeah.
में you start with it, right? And for a lot of us, we're going to work till 50 at least, right? Let's say 45,
हम्म
50, right? So that's
हम्म
what you're looking at, something like 25 years of work, right?
हम्म
I think if you put it in perspective, right, your career is what you're trying to optimize for 25 years, not
हम्म
for 5 years, right? And I think that's what I feel like that's the biggest mistake that people make, because सब लोग शुरू में आते हैं and everybody what they care about is their next promotion, next promotion. I think
हम्म
nature है, it's not just in software engineering, everywhere. Everybody starts at a different skill level than others. Like कुछ past
हम्म
उनके like life में जैसा भी हुआ, कुछ mind का skill है. Nobody starts at the same level, right? Um,
हम्म,
everybody is gonna plateau. Like every single one of us is gonna plateau at a certain level, right?
हाँ हाँ
And most people will plateau in their first 10 years. Like I
हम्म
actually believe this is true. Most people are gonna plateau in a level in the first 10 years, right? And then I
हाँ
think
हाँ
when that right, what you will actually realize is in order to overcome that plateau and go to that next one level, you really
हम्म
needed to skill yourself. You needed to go back and change the skills that you actually didn't have, right?
हम्म
But the calibration here, what I usually tell people is key, you have to really think about the bigger game, and especially when you are the junior, right? Like L3 से L4 जो एक लाइक लेवल है उसको पुश करके ले जाओगे तुम, आई आई
हाँ
100%, अगर तुम लाइक
हाँ
रात रात को काम कर लोगे कुछ हो जाएगा, but you're not going to stick with that, right? You will maybe go to 5 or maybe go to 6 and then you're going to plateau, right? But if you
हम्म
start actually working on the skills.
Mm-hmm.
I identify my strengths, I'm going to build on that, but I also identify
Mm-hmm.
my like areas, and then I build on that also, then setting up yourself for a success, right, longer run.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Actually, you touched upon an interesting point. Double down on your strengths, identify your growth areas. And the other interesting thing you said about is plateau. तो like इस चीज को कैसे क्रॉस करे, जैसे अगर सपोज समवन हैज प्लेटूड एट IC6 या IC5, मतलब व्हाट वुड यू रेकमेंड कि टैक्टिकल टिप्स जो वो कर सकते हैं टू अंडरस्टैंड कि लाइक व्हाई आर दे प्लेटूइंग.
काफी चीजें हैं. आई थिंक प्लेटू में सबसे पहली चीज इज अ माइंडसेट चेंज. यू नीड टू बी पेशेंट. आई थिंक इफ यू गोना कंपेयर योरसेल्फ टू योर पीयर्स, राइट, कि अच्छा ये तो इतना हो गया, it's just going to block your mindset. So there's a thing called growth mindset. I'm sure बहुत लोगों ने पढ़ी होगी. There's a book also about it. But I feel like that's very, very, very relevant, especially when you're going to plateau, right? Because you need to really think about in relative term to yourself, right? कि अच्छा, like, am I growing year over year? Because the absolute plateau से निकलने वाला time can be a lot, right? Like, because you're talking about a skill now, right? Then the second thing is you have to identify what is the core skill that is like plateauing you, right? And for a lot of people, that's actually communication, which is sounds weird, but it's actually true. For a lot of people, it is communication. They're not able to articulate their thoughts well, or they're not able to, get a command of the room that is required as a leadership position, or they're not able to be maybe diplomatic enough that is required for their role to become a director. Right? So you have to identify that. The third part, you have to then put yourself in uncomfortable positions where you actually get to try that out. I usually say to my team also that, hey, in every quarter, you should have 20% of your time being spent on a project where you were actually uncomfortable with. Like,
Right,
it's
right.
easy to be comfortable with a project after you've actually spent a lot of time, but you need to feel that uncomfortableness. You need to be like, I don't think I'll be able to do that. And that 20% actually grow a lot.
Wow, yeah, I think that's those are very very good tips. क्योंकि आई थिंक बहुत सारे लोग जो है उस साइकिल में भी चले जाते हैं कि 100% रिस्की चीज कर लेंगे बिकॉज दे वांट टू ग्रो. आई थिंक दैट 20-30% इज अ वेरी लाइक आई थिंक गुड रिकमेंडेशन कि गिव स्ट्रेच योरसेल्फ, बट ऐसा भी ना करो कि मतलब मर ही जाओ बिकॉज यू हैव टू आइडेंटिफाई कि नाउ देयर इज अ बिग स्किल गैप. Thanks. I think that was very useful. Next question I have for you is that you said ki now your team is focusing on AI. Everybody in the industry is talking about AI. And Google obviously has the maximum talent for AI. And Google कैसे focus कर रहा है AI के ऊपर?
So I mean, like Google and including other companies, they go all in into AI, right? Which is
Yeah.
very evident. I think it's a big bet. I do think it's actually going to change a lot of things that we do in the day-to-day world, right? It's going to change uh, like a lot of jobs how they are carried. I think सबसे simple example मेरे दिमाग में हमेशा आता है. It's a job of like a personal assistant or an admin. Like, Google Assistant wanted to be that, but the technology wasn't there, right? But now just having an assistant side by side, hey, book movie tickets for me, or take notes for this, or like pay this person, right? These are all the things that we actually want to do and would improve our life significantly. There's so many products or people going to do that. Going back, right? I think the technology is still very early. I mean, in the end, basically just auto completing, right? At least the right? But the
Yeah.
technology is exciting because Google and all the big companies are spending so much money into it. It's also growing very, very fast. Right? Why I started working on this? I think there's two reasons. Right? First, what I said about upskilling. Right? I think it's important to learn this skill if you're going to be in software engineering. Right? You have to adapt. Like this technology is very different than the one that we're used to. Right?
Right.
And then the second is obviously like Google is focusing a lot of its effort in it, right? And our org also had a need for focusing the efforts onto this. So yeah, we actually got lucky.
What would be a recommendation for someone who wants to switch to AI? Now I want to join a team which works on AI, and like how do I upskill myself? Do you have any recommendation?
So I think इसको थोड़ा pass करते हैं. I think this is also common confusion in a lot of people, right? Like let's say ML, even a traditional ML, right? Not even the generative AI. कोई भी टीम अगर ML मॉडलिंग करेगी ना, तो यार उसके अंदर 20% ही काम होगा एक्चुअली में ML मॉडल को ट्रेन करने का, और 80% काम एक्चुअली सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग का काम होगा कि उस मॉडल को लेके प्रोडक्शनाइज करना, लोगों को
Application.
करना, एक्चुअली टेस्ट कैसे करना, वैलिडेट कैसे करना, ये सब कुछ रेगुलर सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग का काम है. यू डोंट इवन नीड टू लाइक नो देम. द फनी थिंग इज लाइक कोई PhD नहीं है, कोई मास्टर्स नहीं है, and yet I've been working in it for 8 years, right? Because a lot of it is actually just like normal software engineering. अगर आप मॉडलिंग साइड में जाना भी चाहते हो, there's two versions of it, right? One is, you're treating it as a white box, and whether you're treating it as a black box, right? So I think अगर तुम black box में सिर्फ applied ML करना चाहते हो, तो that's actually very easy to learn. I think आप एक दो कोर्स
Mhm.
करोगे, अंडरस्टैंडिंग करोगे, you just need to apply an algorithm to your problem. And like Google में like इतने amazing tools हैं कि you basically
Mhm.
put your data in your problem statement and it tries all the options for you and it actually gets the most optimal algorithm. So I don't know इसमें बहुत ज़्यादा दिमाग यूज हुआ कि नहीं हुआ किसी का भी. Um,
Mhm.
but then if you actually want to go to this specialized white box ML doing, right? I think उसके लिए you need to work a lot hard, right? Like I think उसके लिए you
Mhm.
probably go back and actually understand the mathematics की like वो चल कैसे, it's going back to the basics, right? And that will take a lot of time. I don't recommend it to people who just want to do it just because ki AI cool and all that, because that is actually hard, right? There's a lot of
हाँ.
deep math to it. There's a lot of researchers spending a lot of time on it, but there's also only 5% of everybody working on AI that is doing that, right? Like
हाँ, हाँ.
95% of the people are
Right.
not doing.
राइट. या आई थिंक वो काफी बड़ा मिसकंसेप्शन है कि अगर इफ यू वांट टू मूव टू एआई या फिर एमएल, तो मतलब तुम्हें पूरा उसी के अंदर स्पेशलाइजेशन होनी चाहिए. लॉट ऑफ टीम्स आर एक्चुअली एएमएल, मतलब अप्लाइड एमएल और अप्लाइड एआई, जो कि एज यू सेड कि 10-20% यू हैव टू ऑब्वियसली हैव अ बेसिक अंडरस्टैंडिंग, एंड उसके बाद इट्स जस्ट एप्लीकेशन. एंड बेसिक अंडरस्टैंडिंग के लिए देयर आर लॉट ऑफ ऑनलाइन रिसोर्सेज which someone can learn and then move to AI. Okay, that's great. Last question. So you have been at Google for 10 years. You are in Silicon Valley. So Google में 10 साल कैसे रख लिया तुझे? Why are you still at Google? What makes you excited about Google?
So I mean, obviously, Google is a great company, right? I think the culture of the company, at least when I joined, was like unmatchable, right? Like I think the best thing that I liked is कि उनकी like core fundamental concepts में है कि nobody is trying to micromanage you. They are actually just trying to keep you happy so that you do your
Mm-hmm.
best work. A very different
Mm-hmm.
mindset. Like somebody actually trying to see कि this person I want to extract the best work out of them, right? So mindset बहुत सही लगता है कि they are
Mm-hmm.
trusting, they're actually pampering me, and they don't expect it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
but then obviously, like we've also heard that Google maybe layoffs हुए हैं अभी, and the culture of the company is
Mm-hmm.
also changing a little bit, right? I think at this stage or in the last 3 years and all, what has kept me is definitely my org of my team. You spend like 8 to 10 hours with them, like for 5 days a week,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when it doesn't even become like a matter of money or something like that, right? It becomes a matter of who do you feel comfortable with, who do you actually enjoy with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've spent a lot of time building my team and I actually love working with them. So that's a major reason in here. And
Mm-hmm.
again, continue to get new opportunities. Like this AI one is another example of it, right? Um,
Yeah.
I'm in a position where my org trusts me. So they are giving me this opportunity. Like, why would I
Mm-hmm.
want to go and reset myself and like build that trust again, right? I mean, again, that's
Mm-hmm.
a valid strategy. And a lot of people like doing that because it gives you that thrill, it gives you a new domain and
Mm-hmm.
all. But my domain just keeps on changing organically like every 2 years कि मुझे वो need नहीं feel होती.
हाँ, आई थिंक अगर उसी में ही और एक्साइटिंग चीजें, दे आर लाइक गिविंग यू न्यू अपॉर्चुनिटीज, दैट्स व्हाई यू फील कि यू आर स्टिल एबल टू चैलेंज योरसेल्फ इन अ गुड वे एंड स्टिल हैविंग द कंफर्ट ऑफ वर्किंग विद पीपल यू लाइक. तो दैट्स ग्रेट. तो लास्ट क्वेश्चन, एक्चुअली मैंने लास्ट क्वेश्चन के लिए बोला था, बट अगेन लास्ट क्वेश्चन. Although you've had a fantastic run, but still, if you look back, anything that you'd like to do differently, and I think this will be definitely useful for जो अभी लोग कॉलेज में है या यूनिवर्सिटी में है कंप्यूटर साइंस में, और वो they'll be joining companies. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do have one regret. I think काफी major regret है. I feel like जब मैं अपने कॉलेज में था तो like attitude थोड़ा बहुत different था. I think वो था कि बस किसी तरीके से सीजी आ जाए और बस like काम नहीं किया. And I also feel like हमारा education system also like focuses a little bit too much on the theoretical. But like when I came here, like what I realized is कि actually कुछ aspects of ये इतने ज़्यादा exciting है कि you actually feel like working on it and that give you a more holistic picture. Like I have realized here, right, कि especially when you meet people from the South Asian like part of the world, right, like engineers and all, उनकी algorithms and data structures की knowledge बहुत deep होती है, but उनकी overall knowledge काफी weak होती है. Like अच्छा क्या हम पूरा सर्वर खड़ा कर सकते हैं, या क्या फायरवॉल क्या होती है, या ऐप कैसे बनाते हैं। देखिए, लाइक दीज आर वेरी एक्साइटिंग थिंग्स, बट हमने कभी प्रोजेक्ट्स उस तरीके से नहीं किए। तो लाइक माय एडवाइस इज, when you get those opportunities in college, right? Like if it is your BTP or something, take a day and think about what would actually excite you. Like build an app, like start a different project. All of those will still qualify with those, but you'll actually enjoy and learn something out of it. That's my advice.
ग्रेट। तो एक्चुअली तो कह रहे हैं कि कॉलेज में पढ़ाई करो अच्छे से, which is a very
Honestly,
controversial advice. So that's your regret. Okay, yeah, I'm just kidding. Cool. Thank you, Abhay. That was very useful. I think especially for me as well, क्योंकि although we know each other for so long, लेकिन I think अभी ऐसे मिलते हैं तो career के बारे में I didn't know that much कि तेरा Google में career कैसा रहा है, like so yeah, that was very useful and I hope कि जो audience भी है हमारी उनके लिए बहुत useful होगा. So thank you for taking out time.
yeah, thank you, Mike and Sajal. I hope all the best for your podcast series.
Thank you.